Good afternoon. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Ranch in Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting cane. Alright, yesterday I put in, where's my hand, the wall, and these two coppish figures with the dog. Looks like they're killing a child. And then I'm going to have this crowd now, as the idea has evolved a little bit to go along with this wall. I'm going to have the crowd edging up over the shoulder and then encircling this podium with the gallows, with the hanging politicians, and then maybe taper it into this scene on the other side of his head and above his shoulder. That will be leading into this scene, then that will be opening up into the background, which I still intend on doing as a burning cityscape, which will be zoomed in. I'll take a little more time. But for now, I'm just going to take the same blue-black mixture and do the crowd edging around the gallows and up over his shoulder. Here we go.
As the information flow that we're embedded in is, in some ways, is pulling us apart. The ego, as we experience it, and the ego sort of sits on top of awareness somewhere, and you can't touch it, you can't feel it. When you look for it, it's not there. But somehow there's a coherent unity that we believe that we experience. But it's being modified by these information flows. The interesting thing is that we assume most of the time that we have this coherent, consistent, regular ego, but it was probably never there. And let me illustrate. Let's say that you came to the session last night and you heard about the yoga session. You said, excellent, I'm going to be up, I'm going to be at the house, I'm going to be there at 7:30 in the morning. And you're firm about it, and you've made the decision, and you're going to do it. And you go to the hot tubs, and you sit in the hot tub for a while, and you maybe go and smoke some dope, and you go back to the hot tubs, and you relax, and all of a sudden it's 2 a.m., and the alarm goes off at 7:30. And the first thing you think is, I'm not doing yoga. Now this is an example. I'm quoting an example almost in toto as was given by George Gurdjieff to P.D. Ouspensky when Ouspensky was a student of his in the 20s, that in fact this I that we claim to have, this unity that we claim to be operating us at all times, isn't. It doesn't exist at all. There's a whole set of them. And they come and they go as they please. They can be based on whether you're dyspeptic from the oatmeal you had for breakfast, or whether you're mellow because you've just finished a set of yoga, or if you're deeply in love and it's evoking certain things. So in fact what we're doing is we're always taking strands and holding them together into some sort of unity, which is, for the moment, who you are. Well, this information flow that we're experiencing, particularly with respect to the internet and with respect to virtual reality, appears to be amplifying and intensifying this drive to multiple personality. It appears to be making it more visible to us. And I'll give you a case in point. Sherry Turkle is a psychologist, child psychologist, developmental psychologist, and researcher who until recently was at the MIT, I believe, in the Media Lab. And she'd done a lot of research on people who use in spaces that are called either multi-user dimensions or multi-user dungeons, or shorthand MUDs. You enter into a MUD, and a MUD is generally a text-based virtual world. And really, when we're talking about it, I would think the internet is just as much VR. We have different levels of fidelity on the experience. Is it a visual experience? Is it an oral experience? Is it a typed experience, a textual experience? It doesn't seem to matter because the virtual reality machinery we're always using at all times is up here. It's not something that's out there. We can maybe do better tricking ourselves from moment to moment if we have pretty pictures to look at. But really that's just a form of hypnosis. So we have people who are participating in these multi-user worlds, and part of what you do in this multi-user world is you create a character for yourself. And you live in that character while you're participating in that virtual world. And there are thousands of these moves and machines in colleges all across the country and at various research facilities, and people set them up in their homes, and they have themes. There's a Star Trek world, there's a Dune world, there's a world of, I think it's called Fuzzies, where the people run around and have sex with each other all the time. In very interesting configurations that are not necessarily associated with human biology. And so you find these characters, and your character developing out of this, and you might have a very specific form of a character. I might be Xena, or a big warrior princess in one of these worlds. And when I'm interacting in this mud, I'll take on all of the characteristics of this person. I'll functionally be this person. I'll draw the lines of my being together in a configuration that creates that person. So Turco looked at this and said, okay, what's the fundamental difference between this and an individual who is diagnosed with a multiple personality disorder, which has now been rephrased, I think, in DSM-4, a dissociative identity disorder. But we're familiar with the concept, right? People have personalities that become dominant, but they have an entire sea of them. It's almost as if that normalcy that's in each of us, in these particular individuals, has been amplified to the point where the ego doesn't note the personalities coming and going. The personalities simply shove out, and they are the person. And then it submerges, and another one comes out. Well, of course, there's a contextual difference, because at some level you know you're switching between your warrior princess self and your software engineer self at any moment in time. And you can make these contextual switches quickly, right? I can have one window on the screen, which is me typing into the mud, and I can have another window, which is me typing a program. And if I'm really facile with the manipulation of my personality, I can go back and forth between these very quickly. I actually find that very difficult, because when I'm invested in a character, there's a lot of energy there, and so I don't want to make the transition too quickly. What we see, particularly in cyberpunk science fiction, is that this quality of dissociative identity is identified as a positive aspect. In William Gibson, repetitively you see the image of characters who are written by the Loa of Wooden, that they literally disassociate themselves and become a god form. And the gods speak through them. So this is one set of identities that are being drawn up because of the information that they're drawing through the net, which is producing a new personality in them. I think, and I want to assert for testing, that our children particularly are becoming facile at this, because our children are growing up in this web of connectivity. A child who's 6 years old will never have known a world without the web, or without communications on a massive scale that can individuate particular parts of their personality in specific directions. One of my friends actually pointed out that this is all happening before their brains are fully formed, before their corpus callosum sort of shuts down their possibilities in a biochemical level for change. And that our children may in fact be very, very nimble at manipulating personalities, and they may not, as they grow up, see personality as the singular, coherent ego, which is an artifact of probably sort of Renaissance Western culture when the artistic ego was born, and may in fact see themselves as an identity that is shifting from moment to moment and contextualized and can really be highly individuated, and it can still be them. That it's almost as if we're all coming out of the closet with different clothing on, and we can go back in and change the suit of clothing and come out. Now, that personality, those personalities can conflate, not just in terms of gameplay or interesting forms like that, but one of the things that I believe will happen is that we'll be able to take, again, these inhuman points of view, so that it might be able to be possible to come up with a personality that can conflate its identity with the Gaian Logos. Case in point, we haven't actually been up in a space shuttle to see the planet floating around. But I did see something pretty close in 1995. What I think of as the finest, the most seminal work of early virtual reality is a system that's known as T-Vision. And T-Vision is a supercomputer that uses a very large database to create a view of the planet as it is right now and its network. So it's talking to weather satellites, it's talking to geographical data, and it's got an intense, huge, multi-gigabyte database of the Earth's surface. It runs on a supercomputer, and you sit with a beach ball-sized trackball, and you live, because because we don't have the satellites in orbit for that yet, but we will. And the other data that's coming in, though, the geological data, the meteorological data, and so on and so forth, that is live. So what you're getting at some level is a static view of the planet as it was photographed at some point, the geological view, which is gathered from terrain data, and this meteorological view, which is live. And I saw this, and something inside me simply snapped. I said, this was the vision that I'd had in 1990. This is the beginning of a type of thing that will be so commonplace that the globe that sits on every teacher's desk in every schoolroom in the world will be gone and replaced with this thing that will become conflated with our understanding of the planet. That in fact the planet is not this static ball that you can roll around that shows political divisions, because the first thing that goes away when you use a system like this is political division. There's no room for it in that model. What you see is the organic unity of the Gaian logos. And as time goes on, the better this model gets. The better this model gets, the more identified we become with it. Like the cell phone, it becomes a technology that we incorporate, so that one of the personalities that we can identify with will be the personality that is identical to this Gaian entity.
Don't you think it would be prudent to, instead of jumping directly to the Gaian logos, rather to see the Gaian anus, see the economic and resource flows?
Oh, I didn't mean to say that you'd only have one view. The idea behind any system like this is that it can show you all of the loops of human ecology and deep ecology, so that it's very possible to understand the correlations that take place between human effect on the planet and the result in the system. The idea behind it, in my eyes, is that if we can make these tangible, we can affect behavior, and in fact that's probably the only way we can affect behavior. We might recycle because we've been told over and again it's the right thing to do. It's been ingrained in that level. But when it becomes a tangible entity, the behavior change happens of itself, because it's part of you. It's become incorporated into your own understanding of how the world works. So I think that, in fact, this database, as I say, as it grows, needs to become as deep as possible. And because people will argue about the content of that database, it needs to become as wide as possible. And the web is the beginning of that, because you could have several different points of view. You could have the millennialist Christian point of view, which is to simply put us on the planet because we're leaving anyway, and have that be, one set of them, and we can sort of chart Amazonian deforestation and say, oh, look, the number of days till the rapture, because that's how much rainforest is left.
Theoretically, you should be able to see anything you want to see to the exclusion of everything else. So if you wanted to see oil pipelines, electrical grids, the distribution of leukemia genes, the number of people bearing South African passports and where they were at any given moment, you should be able to, essentially it's a boil down of all the data.
When I sort of recognized that ability, I thought of it as a really great game idea, kind of the Sim series. It's really Sim Gaia, but it would not be simulated, really. You could have every participant in the web utilizing all the resources of the whole planet to focus on any particular area they were interested in healing and make sort of suggestions to large corporations how to distribute their
in which case,
resources.
It starts to harness the power of drug, and we really haven't talked about this as an intelligence amplifier, which it can, in theory, do, and that's one of the biggest parts of it. In fact, one of the reasons things do move faster now is because there's this common sort of, it's almost like a hummus of knowledge. It's this layer of knowledge that we can all refer to. It's not all true, but it is all in common.
I want to say something about what you were talking about, multiple personality and all that. I hadn't quite thought of it that way. One of the puzzles of the DMT flash is that there are these entities that seem weird, very strange and machine-like and alien, but that are also permeated by a kind of eerie familiarity, like you remember them from somewhere, or it's this thing. And it's occurred to me in trying to propagate all possible explanations of what these things might be, that they are, as Mark said, the self is not ruled by the ego. The self is actually a kind of elfin swarm of these, and this peculiar elf quality, which I've described as elf machine-like and somehow based on language, is that these things are, and don't ask me to explain too deeply what this means, they are fractal refractions of one's own personality. I've mentioned at times the metaphor of if you hold up a mirror, you see yourself. But if you bring the mirror down sharply on a concrete surface so that it shatters, you don't see a shattered image of yourself. You see hundreds of perfect images of yourself, one in each shard, little ones, big ones. And in a sense, DMT is like some kind of an X-ray of the psyche, revealing this fact concealed by the ego-based, print-created, subjectivist, positivist plot. The fact that you are not who you thought you were, that you are not an ego bound to a body, but that in fact that is some hideous convention that culture and the phonetic alphabet and all these things have forced upon you. And so then, in thinking about this new kind of personality that's coming to be, or how will one live with this sense of fracturing and all that, you said it was almost as though everybody was coming out of the closet. The image that formed for me is, it's like realizing and embracing the fact that you're an actor. Right? I grapple with this all the time because when I'm brushing my teeth, I find myself humming, "There's no business like show business. There's no people like show people." And I've, started out thinking that I was a philosopher. And the way I live in Hawaii is so entirely different from how I am on what I think of as the job, that I have just had to accept that I'm this very strange person and have peculiarly defined relationships with almost every single person that I deal with. And I have a feeling that the modern cult of celebrity and this fascination with vicariously living through the most recent spate of mass murderers, presidential assistants, movie stars, and so on, is a kind of practice. Ordinary people are practicing to be actors, to have this same
to be extraordinary,
to be mutable, and it seems inevitable. It's modeled for us in the media so persuasively that we can't help but become characters. That's what's happening to us. We're becoming characters, many characters. Yeah.
Now, is this a desirable thing? Intonations.
Is it a positive thing?
Yeah, I mean, you have kids in Chicago who,
Well, that's not a positive thing. Please don't frighten me.
violence somewhere, maybe from the movies, and murdered this little girl for a bicycle, and 2 hours later be home watching cartoons and having popcorn. So is it a good thing to have the little kid persona and the murderer persona and all these things so we can come out and enact whatever we want to be?
There are answers in all that. No, you answered in all that.
There are, I think in any situation where there's a disassociation like that, my own understanding is that there are attractors for behavior. And some of those attractors are pathological. And so if a personality coheres around those pathological attractors, you're going to get pathological behavior. It won't be consistent. That's why the kids can go home and watch TV afterward. Because they're really, I think, in some sense, disassociated from those parts of their being that produce that type of behavior. So what would be called for in a situation if we're going to accept disassociation as a condition of modernity, then the idea would be to, in the reverse sense, build as many what I would call vivogenic attractors, present as many opportunities for cohesion around the personality in a positive logos. And I mean, again, that brings us back to the body. And if I can just ramble for one more minute, which led me into the concept of techno-paganism, for lack of a better word, and that's a placeholder, which is a positive response to this type of fracture, that I can, through ritual practice, through magical practice, build areas in myself that allow for that positive cohering of the personality, which doesn't have to be any single one personality, but can be a range of God forms. Because paganism is a study of the archaic God forms, which can represent the archetypal elements of my psyche, so that I can bring them forth in a particular situation or toward a particular task. So that I could, do Pan if I'm going to be in a sexual mode. I can do Hermes or Mercury if I'm going to be in either communication mode or I want to trick someone. Okay? I can do Cernunnos if I want to sort of be, sort of the very sort of primal male, or I can be the mother if I want to be very nurturing, so that all these primal God forms can act as loci for accretion of a personality around a particular point. And my magical practice has been much that for me as a point of stability in there.
I'd like to draw just back to Terence's inference that, or what I took from it was that, well, we were in the tub last night and with Terry's kids, and I was grilling Terry's kids about this whole 2012 and how much novelty can there be, and it seemed that at the point of maximum novelty, my suggestion was, well, does that means essentially that it's one big Burning Man, no spectators, so that everybody in Utah is now putting out their own electronic CDs and stuff, and making their own videos. Somebody bounced that back to the web, of course. The web pages are like that. There's the grandmas in Utah, and just these crazy, unbelievable expressions of creativity from your sort of average person. So, is that maybe what that level of novelty is maybe moving towards? Is the Truman Show, or waiting for Guffman, essentially?
No, I think we're probably close to that now. What with See You, See Me, and people who sell the fact that they exist on the internet through 24-hour cam.
MyFirstTime.com.
Yes, exactly. But this issue that you raise, we are on one level carnivorous monkeys, and part of what people have to realize, I think, is that culture is not your friend. What techno-paganism means to me is arming yourself as a warrior to survive the onslaught of all the magic spells that are being flung around in your environment. And so, what Mark said about, we keep coming back to this thing about every piece of information that comes through you affects you. Certainly Esalen is a place where very strongly now for many years the idea has been in place that there was such a thing as healing images, that people by imaging states of health or the shrinking of tumors and so forth could actually affect their own state of being. What hasn't been looked at with sufficient attention is the concomitant to that, which is if there are healing images, then there are polluting images, damaging images, images which make being a human being a more difficult proposition. And we have been very loath to examine this because we are very deeply committed as a culture to the idea of freedom of expression. But the doctrines of freedom of expression and universal education and so forth that we're so fond of were formulated before the rise of modern mass psychology, marketing theory, the Joseph Goebbels contribution to the situation. And I think people are responsible for their mental health. To assume that you are born mentally healthy and will tend to stay that way is preposterous. All kinds of forces are trying to turn you into a compulsive, an obsessive, a sexual psychopath, a wannabe this, many forms of intellectual pollution abound. And people who endlessly imbibe mass media are at high risk for pathology. And when I hear about these things that go on, not particularly this one you mentioned, but the ones where kids go to schools and blow other kids away somewhere in the South, and then immediately what the media portrays is a week of church suppers and mass mourning where everyone asks, how could this happen? Well, church suppers are what drive people.
One of the things that I think is really important to remember, one of the kind of pathological edges of our cutting edges of our time, is that as we move into this era of connectivity and massive amounts of information at our fingertips, and the fact that these 6-year-olds are going to grow up never knowing anything else but having that capability, the adults who are raising them do not come from that world. And how can you possibly imagine raising a child to live in a world that you've never even touched, that you will be nothing but a little footnote in? So this makes a very, very dangerous time. Children who are 6 to 10 years old today are going to live their lives in the 21st century, and they're going to have to pick their way into what the 21st century, the third millennium is like, on their own. It's not going to be easy. It's not always going to be pretty. And it's tough. It's hard. It's really hard to own that. But I think personally, I think that's part of growing out of the human condition. You've got to take